in prison, far less than the 11 years requested, far more than the 14 months. He will not walk out of the door behind me in the courtroom today. He will not be a free man for 50 months. The judge says, which is a little shy of 4.25 years. This is a serious sentence that reflects the gravity of your crimes and conducts. He also says this is a hard time away from your family, but also notes that Combs will have a life after prison, after 50 months. This is demonstrating to the court the gravity of the crimes and the conduct, Casey. Here you have it, 50 months for the two charges, transportation for the purpose of prostitution, the Mann Act violations. They tried very hard as the defense today, Casey, to suggest that would be a high sentence given the fact that the defense says, he did not financially benefit and profit from these so-called prostitution acts. The judge rejecting that, rejecting it almost out of hand, sentencing the music mogul, convicted in July by a jury of his peers, to 50 months in prison.
And Lisa France, I'd like to talk to you for a second about kind of the big picture of what this means, because as we've been covering this, we saw the judge touch on, and we saw the defense talk about what Sean Diddy Combs' contributions, positive contributions, have been to society. Obviously, during the trial, we talked quite a bit about the negative contributions that he is now being held to account for. But what is this going to mean for the millions of people who've been following this trial? What more does it say about where we are?
Well, Casey, because of the positive contributions, it's the reason why so many people feel so very strongly about this. Having seen the video, having heard the testimony, it is a huge disappointment to a lot of his fans, because this is a man who has had a career that has spanned music and fashion and restaurants and spirits. I mean, he was someone that, as they like to say, got it out the dirt, came from the hood and really elevated himself as a young man who, went to Howard University and would jump on the train and go back to New York City and work as an intern, and worked his way up from an intern to founding his own record label. And Bad Boy Records, I mean, it was the soundtrack for so many people's youth. So when you saw what was alleged against Sean Combs, and then when you followed this trial, it was a complete and utter devastating disappointment to a lot of his fans who expected much more of him. Now, I've said this before on air, for those of us who have covered him for years, this was not a surprise, these allegations. We had heard rumors, we have heard people saying that they were afraid of him, that, he had a lifestyle that not everybody would approve of. And so I think now, hearing the verdict, there are going to be some people who absolutely continue to support him. There are still people, even having seen the video, who say that, Cassie Ventura was someone who, participated. But also there are people who say that it's absolutely disgusting. And I thought it was interesting that Sean Combs used that word when he was referencing the videotape. He said that it was disgusting, and he appeared in his remarks to try to take ownership, to also try to sound contrite. But at the same time, to Laura's point, he was very careful about not saying anything that might cause a problem when he tries to, get back into court and get this revisited, by appealing this. So, I think that we're always going to have a split. That's always the case when you have things like this. Today is the 30th anniversary of the acquittal of O.J. Simpson. And while these are two very different cases, we're still having conversations about what it means when you have a successful, famous Black defendant in these cases. Can they really get a fair trial? Are people going to view them differently? Will he be able to have the type of life that he could have, after he gets out? And so, these conversations continue. It's very historic. And, I had plenty of people hitting me up earlier today saying, what's your over under? What do you think? Do you think he's going to be able to, maybe just get out in a couple of months? Do you think he's going to get years? I think at the end of the day, people just, some people wanted to see justice, and some people thought, much like I think Mr. Combs thought, that after he was acquitted of the more serious charges, that he was going to be walking out of that courtroom and heading back home to Miami and going back to, the lifestyle in some ways that he enjoyed before. Not the dark parts that we heard about, but absolutely the fame, the fortune, and the being a celebrity.
Yeah, well, and we're also just learning here that the judge imposed the maximum $500,000 fine against Combs here. And Laura Coates, can you help us understand from a legal point of view? Obviously, there will be a process that continues on here. Assume there will be an appeal. I mean, how much of more time do we expect based on the sentence that he'll spend in prison?
He has been serving some time in the jail, not a federal prison. It's a holding over location in anticipation of trial and, of course, of sentencing, which means that the time he has served under the auspices, of course, of the Bureau of Prisons will be applied to the sentence he has. He also can have the benefit of some sorts of federal programming for somebody who is having their first official sentence, and good time served, et cetera, good behavior, participation, in a number of programs geared at going against recidivism, a fancy legal way of saying you're not to do crimes again. That will all be factored into his overall sentence. But they talked about the resources that are going to have been available to him. That's why he has that penalty of $500,000. We're talking about a man with an empire that was worth more, $500 million or more. That's a very important point, because had they convicted him on RICO, the government's hands come out. They want the money that could be associated with anything to do with a crime related to an enterprise. That went away, but he still now has this fine, and he still has civil suits to contend with. Those do not go away. They are not paused while he is in a federal prison, and they also have a lower standard than the criminal court. Remember, the criminal court, beyond a reasonable doubt. A civil suit, the preponderance of evidence, meaning more likely than not. Referencing the OJ trial that my colleague Lisa mentioned, remember that was a case, there was an acquittal at the criminal level. He still had a, $33 million fine in the civil suit from the family of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson as well. That is possible for all of the, I think, more than 100, if my counts are accurate right now, that have been filed. I'm not sure how many are still in existence here. But I will say the judge also referencing not only Cassie Ventura, but also the pseudonymed victim Jane, who testified. Remember, those two women were the subject of the people listed in those prostitution-related charges. The judge said Miss Ventura and Jane, speaking to them, they were not in the courtroom. You've been through abuse and trauma that most of us cannot imagine, and thanked them for coming forward. To Miss Ventura, Jane, and the other victims here who came forward, I can only say your families are proud of you, and your children, when they're old enough, will be proud of you. And I am proud of you for telling the world what really happened. You were speaking to the millions of women out there who have been victims but feel invisible. I mean, going on to talk about and the powerlessness as well. This is really important here, because earlier today we knew that the prosecution was berating the defense team for what they believe was bullying behavior that forced, they say, one of the women who testified in this case to not speak as a victim impact statement provider in this courtroom. That's an important point here. But ultimately, again, here is the rub in our criminal justice system, Casey, and you and I have talked about the policies and beyond. But listen, even though he's convicted, with an appeal ahead of him, he never has to admit to the charges against him. He can always maintain his innocence throughout the course of the appeal, and frankly, for the rest of his life. But in this instance, the judge said, I don't believe that your profession of innocence outweighs what the jury found. That's why 50 months in prison will be appropriate, they say, for this person.